All right. Good evening. You're joining us here on Pump Up the Volume. So thanks for coming back, everyone. My name is Luis Daniel Muñoz. I'm a medical doctor, also previous independent gubernatorial candidate here in the state of Rhode Island, and someone who likes to push the buttons and really ask the challenging questions to those that are in leadership. But to what end? The end is to really ensure that there is an equitable allocation of resources to communities throughout the state of Rhode Island. And so, if you are joining us for the first time today, know that the title "Pump Up the Volume" is in fact our way of saying we are going to raise our voices. We are going to amplify many of the questions that are not being asked on mainstream media. And joining me to do that are my fellow co-hosts. We are missing one person today, and I'll get to Scott later. But we have Mr. Bill Bartholomew from the Bartholomew Town podcast, also making headlines all over the place from PBS and taking shows on WPRO, and really growing in a great way here in the state of Rhode Island, and always on the ground, the person on the ground, getting the stories that everyone else is using. So thanks, Bill, for joining us. I know that things are getting busy for you, but it's great to have you here. And we also have Mr. Pat Ford from, again, the Coalition Radio Network, founder of the medium through which we are streaming, and co-founder of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. And Pat also has been, again, a community advocate and activist, someone that's going out there and not just in theory, but really putting words to action in terms of challenging the status quo and advocating for communities on a number of issues. If you're listening to us from Pawtucket, you would know that McCoy Stadium was one of those big issues as well. We also have normally, even though Scott couldn't make it today, Scott Rotunda from WBOB 990. So independent media personality, but also community advocate, accounting and financial expert, and someone who's been very active in Rhode Island politics for some time. And what we all try to do on the show is really, again, bring each of our unique perspectives to the conversation, ask questions, at times challenge one another. And of course, by the end of this, really hope to empower you with a better understanding, a deeper understanding of what's been going on over the past 7 days, and hopefully with a desire to affect some influence or impact on that conversation, right? Whether it's reaching out to your leaders, representatives, or you yourself, taking the baton, running with it. And this at this point in time in this pandemic, communities need all the help they can get. So with that, that's a really long intro, but I noticed that sometimes we have new listeners. So I want to make sure you really understand what we're all about, who is speaking. And from this point on, we're going to do what we always do. Bill's going to give us an update on what's been going on over the past 7 days. I know today was a big day for the departing governor. But after that update, we'll try to really look at what the most important and pressing issue is. And we might feel it out. We might talk about one thing or two, but the key is that we're going to have an open conversation here, and we'll take it where it may go. So Bill, would you like to start us off?
Well, big day for Governor Raimondo, and that's something that I think, aside from politics, Governor Raimondo is somebody who's obviously wanted a national profile for a long time. She's really learned how to take a photograph, in terms of the national press. You can go back to like 2010 and look at her in a photo as compared with now. She understands how to do it. She understands how to be on camera. Everything that she's learned from the COVID crisis as far as addressing people was fully executed today in her committee hearing to become the next Commerce Secretary. But throughout that same performance on a political level, there are so many things that stuck out that we couldn't even do it. We couldn't get to them in 30 minutes. But when you compare the perspective of Gina Raimondo as a national figure, as someone who was a part of the big money, big party infrastructure, as compared with her boots on the ground, for lack of a better term, approach to managing COVID in the most delicate spaces, those pictures couldn't contrast more. And it's fascinating to me that even in this confirmation hearing, the only thing that anybody could bring up in a negative light for the most part was Senator Ted Cruz, of all people, who brought up Rhode Island's position on an infamous CNBC ranking that we were the 50th worst economy for business in the country. So that was the worst jab that the governor got. No mention of her handling of COVID and the closure of small businesses without adequate triage, and the lack of action in the most critical areas, particularly certain zip codes, nursing homes, etc. And here we are again as the worst place per capita, worst state in the union per capita in terms of COVID. So contrasting storylines, I think that is the big story here in Rhode Island. Obviously, Lieutenant Governor McKee making moves, getting prepared to enter into the gubernatorial role in a matter of weeks, building his transition team. Some have criticized that team for being bloated and over the top. I myself think that some of the names he's brought in, if they're not just tokens, it does add for a more robust agenda potentially. And by the way, if you're looking for a job right now, Pat Ford maybe for lieutenant governor, they put a job application up to literally apply to become a heartbeat away from governor of the state of Rhode Island. So if you're out there and you've ever had political aspirations but didn't really want to do the work that Dr. Muñoz knows, that Pat Ford knows, and I've observed certainly as a person covering campaigns, if you don't want to go stand at India Point Park on a 93-degree day in July collecting signatures, etc., go ahead and apply to simply become the lieutenant governor of Rhode Island. Maybe you can be the quote-unquote second or third most powerful person in the Ocean State.
Yeah, thanks for the update, Bill. So I did see the hearing with the governor. Interesting. She dodged the net neutrality question. I thought she dodged that very in a sophisticated way. I was surprised by how many Republicans actually want to get her confirmed very quickly. I guess not really surprised, but it's revealing. I think what we all, and I don't mean that from a grassroots Republican standpoint. I mean that from corporate, high level, crony kind of way. But hey,
as I mentioned, just quickly, as I mentioned on Twitter, I don't think it's much of a coincidence that she was wearing purple today, much like Alan Fung with his purple tie throughout most of the 2018 campaign, suggesting that's where she lives politically, right there in that center. But she's center right in the global spectrum when you look at her financials. And that's why she received such a favorable greeting today by the committee.
Well, let's be blunt. The Republicans, and at this point, have no appetite whatsoever to take on a allegedly a moderate Democrat who purports to be pro-business. They just have no appetite. There's no fire in the belly right now, really, to oppose any of her appointees, given what's transpired over the last few weeks. Secondly, there's no appetite whatsoever for Rhode Islanders to get in the way because, quite frankly, they want to get her the hell out of town as quickly as possible so we can move on with our lives. So if there was ever a shoo-in for confirmation, this would be it. Secondly, here's a woman who embraced the Donald Trump, the shill campaign on capital tax, capital gains deals for investors in order to take over, air quotes, blighted properties in cities like the Bucket. We're going to gentrify the snot out of you, and you're going to love it, and we're going to use tax breaks to finance it. So this is she is quite frankly, merging into what conforms today to be a moderate Republican. Given the cronyist behavior that she exhibited. And again, I thought of going down to D.C. and sitting in the aisles and say, but Governor, there's no shared sacrifice. But I'd probably get booed out of the place. And by the way, I am considering quite seriously that application for Lieutenant Governor. And if they don't give me an interview, I am going to, I'm going to camp out in front of Brett Smiley's office. How about that? It's what a day. And listen, I got to raise too. You talked about some of the questionable members of the transition committee. I did a piece this week on Armand Sabatoni, who is the treasurer secretary of LIUNA, the laborers union locally. These are the very same people right now who are working with a cash-rich Twin Rivers to make sure that the members of the local LIUNA car dealers, literally on the front lines, the cashiers, if you will, for the state of Rhode Island, what is purported to be the third largest source of revenue. These are the people who took away health insurance, present them on a daily basis in unsafe, unsanitary working conditions, chaotic scheduling, a sub-minimum wage salary base, relying exclusively on tips in the middle of a pandemic, and don't ever ask me about chips. If I tell you what they do with chips, you'll never go to a casino again, Luis. It's just so for him to be the only representative for unions in the state is very telling about what the McKee administration has painted themselves as versus what they really are. I'm not optimistic. I'm looking at their behavior. I'm looking at their appointees. The decision to continue on with the failed administration of the Raimondoistas, that's terrible. Oh my God, most of these people deserved a boot in the ass, a year or two ago. They're going to stay on?
Well, look,
Yikes.
I mean, let's also acknowledge that the governor just today, I think it was reported by WPR, someone on WPR, or it could have been the Globe, that there's a series of appointments or reappointments that the governor made today, a long list, right? So the governor is also trying to solidify some people, and we're talking like behind just this transition team that McKee is working on now. In terms of that transition team, I know that we all want to applaud this idea of bringing municipal leaders together because we want communities to inform the decisions that are impacting them, and I get that from a collective process, right, of organizing. But the municipal leaders that are being brought to this table are very much a part of a little club. Right, we know that Policina, Lombardi, they're coming together, and at the end of the day, the question for me becomes, are these processes that are being set up actually fair and equitable in terms of opportunity? And my concern is not. That application is going to go nowhere. I mean, the people that are doing the vetting, Mayor Policina, has stated that James Dios is his friend and he likes him. And this is not about Mayor Dios. It's not about the good work in terms of recreational areas, parks, rebuilding and restoring community in Central Falls. This is not to disregard that good work, but this is just to say that there's an application process set up, and is it real? And if it's not real, then my concern is that reflective of an administration that's coming in with the optics of equity, with the optics of economic opportunity, but behind the optics, no real infrastructure, no real desire to take that path forward, right? That is a question I think we should be asking ourselves. There's also issues that Lieutenant Governor can be jumping right into to tackle now, like codifying telemedicine in the state of Rhode Island. And instead, we're seeing the Senate modify legislation, or at least propose it in such a way that would actually make it even more expensive now than before the pandemic to pay for telemedicine in terms of co-payments. So what is that about? And telemedicine, I just want to put this out there before I leave this topic. Why is it important? Why should this soon-to-be governor be jumping in on codifying telemedicine? Because when we talk about mental health parity, when we talk about mental health, right, in terms of the fact that its prevalence is increasing, that when we look at substance abuse and homelessness, and we look at the issues that are influencing the people that are, what those individuals are afflicted by, people that are struggling with homelessness, we often find that the remedy could have been and still can be mental health. And so how do you provide access to mental health on someone's mobile device, on someone's computer, where they don't have to travel, they're not limited by transportation to get somewhere? Well, you do that through telemedicine. And so by not codifying telemedicine, not only do we inhibit the ability of people to be taken care of today, to have a reassurance, right, that they can stay at home or not, but also in the future, we're going to continue to feed into this crisis in mental health that we have and maintain the status quo around how we fund mental health, which is different from how we fund other forms of more expensive healthcare. So that is a concern. He could be jumping into that, but he doesn't. And this leads me full circle to something that I'd love to get both of your ideas on, which is, suddenly Lieutenant Governor is coming in and without really even catching up to the science and just generally how you go about coordinating distribution and weighing risk. There seems to be rapid changes to what might be phase 1, phase 2 proposals for who gets vaccinated or who doesn't. And I'm interested in getting both of your perspectives as to whether you think those are founded in science or in political gaming.
I'll go first. I think it's pure political gamesmanship. And again, here we go. We're doing a terrible job. Part of the frustration for someone like me is you've got two issues at stake in the day-to-day lives of government and how they interact with the citizenry. And number one, of course, is theory, policy, philosophy, all that. And then there's, quote unquote, just the sheer execution. The late, great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci often talked about, the ability to pick up the trash and plow the roads. Coming in here today, I can tell you, and by the way, I apologize to folks, the reason where the show's running late because, well, Providence, once again, shows it can't plow the roads. But let's get down to brass tacks here. Plowing the roads is critical and can impact people's lives. Distributing a vaccine is monumental on multiple levels, and it's a reflection of how poorly our government is run. Maybe they get more buy-in from conservatives if they simply, once they spend all this money and enact this incredible infrastructure, actually just do something right for once. Once, please. Maybe. Just this one time. So it's all politics. It's all inefficient. It's all grotesque. We're wasting money and we're putting people's lives at stake, most importantly.
Yeah, and quickly going back to the telemedicine bill, Sam Bell tweeted from the Senate floor that it was a necessary decision to send it back to committee. He writes that he proposed several amendments to hold insurance companies accountable. So I don't have that legislation in front of me. I can't say exactly what it is, but you're totally right that the telemedicine component of things, that's a no-brainer. How is that not already in existence, right? As we never mind something that's still being debated in committees. For the vaccines, look, I called out by name Dr. James Finale last week. I don't know, maybe the guy's a great guy, might be an amazing guy. I know I spoke with Dr. Pablo Rodriguez a few weeks ago that Dr. James Finale is, in fact, someone who occasionally treats patients, obviously not in an ICU capacity, but in a specialization capacity. So he receiving a vaccine may very well be legitimate and something that's appropriate based on that phase 1A criteria. However, to do so in front of the Providence Journal's cameras, in front of Channel 10, Channel 12, with Steve Klampkin putting a mic into his proximity, and as if to celebrate that he is doing so in a leadership capacity, that is not anything other than political gamesmanship. And the notion that other organizations should continue down this path of inoculating people who are not on the front lines is completely disgusting. So it's a combination of failed distribution, a failed last mile delivery process in terms of getting the vaccine to where it needs to be, but it's also on another political breakdown in people who are used to having special interest and special favor and being able to just go about their business without expecting anyone to care. They're protected by other big institutions here in the state.
Like radio stations.
So what do you think about McKee's most recent decision, or I would say proposal? I don't know if it was a final decision to actually move teachers just globally right up the list.
I personally, I don't understand how you can just take this gigantic swath of a population and simply decide that all teachers should be up on the list, and as opposed to all this or all of that. Now, I think the only degree of unanimity out there is about elderly folks. I think, in my personal opinion, you have to get the elderly folks geared up first when it's medically viable. After that, quite frankly, if a teacher is teaching remotely, and I have no problems with people making individual decisions to teach remotely. I don't know that they should get the vaccine before someone who is, I don't know, in a different level of first responder. I think it's got to be far more conditional, but at the same time, it's got to be quick. There should be an available data on mean time between when the vaccine is received and when it's used. Pretty simple process. God knows government makes us go through all sorts of hoops on just about everything else in the world. Suddenly they can't do that. So I just don't believe in universals, doctor.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges, and I'll echo something that other people have been saying this week, which is that we really can only have one governor at a time. Now, should Gina Raimondo resign as she pursues and seems to be inevitably becoming the Commerce Secretary here? I mean, that's another discussion, but it is difficult for having a co-governorship of any kind. You can't really do that. The toughest bands I've ever been in are the bands that have two people who write songs and sing them. You know what I mean? The toughest teams I've ever played on in any sport are when there's more than one superstar. By the way, I've never been the superstar myself, but leadership is human nature. I think people are getting confused, and whether or not you agree with the person who's at the top of the food chain, that's up for debate. But the idea of having one voice transmitting a plan, I think that's critical, especially right now in these types of chaotic crisis modes. But the specifics of teachers, yeah, I agree with Pat. The first people who should be vaccinated are people who are elderly. My parents are in Florida. My dad's 80. My mom's in her late 60s. And the difficulty that they're having there to sign up on the different portals, and it's very similar to our portal type systems that we have here in Rhode Island. There's an impractical system set up, and until the vast majority of people who are most vulnerable are vaccinated, I don't think we should be vaccinating anybody else. They're saying media is going to get vaccinated as part of phase 2. So somehow they're going to bring in Ted Nesi and everybody and line them up and give them the shot. Meanwhile, I can't imagine that we would have completed frontline workers in the healthcare sector, frontline workers in essential businesses, and those who are most vulnerable in the elderly population, and all of the elderly population for that matter. So, McKee making that decision now, it's not politically smart, in my opinion, to, contradict what the governor's doing. I think for his own sake, I think he gets him into potential tough situation. But then once he is governor, we will have to evaluate where are we at with the distribution to the most vulnerable.
I appreciate you both sharing that. So, just want to, on one hand, one of the things that you said, Bill, like in terms of McKee and there should only be one governor, like I get that, but my concern is whether it's McKee, whether it's the people that commented on his decision, and Eli Gorbeas, Elorza's, the magaziners, right, which Projo were all disagreeing with his decision. My concern is that these individuals aren't solutions oriented. Like in this rapid response, you need a plan or a counter plan. This isn't about this works or it doesn't. Absolutes and platitudes don't work in this crisis because lives are lost. And I'm looking at the situation and I'm saying let's acknowledge we have parents that have children that have certain needs that they need someone there to support them, right? Whether it's a basic EIP, whether it's a special situation at home, whether it's a health condition, like those students needing to be in school, we can quantify and even assess who those teachers are serving those populations, right? And we can have a fraction of teachers that need to be in school. They get pushed up the line to address the needs because teachers that are in person, are possibly coming into contact with community spread, right? I mean, with individuals that get infected in the community and so forth. So that makes sense. Not all teachers necessarily need to be in school, but that has to come from the governor as well, right? I mean, having a 6-week period until distribution is improved of distance learning as a mandate with only special circumstances in-person teaching would help provide some teachers with the vaccination and then leave others in a safe area. And for those who are willing to volunteer and risk their lives without getting the vaccine, if they just want to be in person, well, we have a ton of funds that are not going to substitute teachers because there's no substitute teachers that really want to work. Why aren't we providing financial incentives to keep those teachers that are taking high risk, incentivized to be in school? Like it doesn't in any way, again, this is why it's volunteer if they want to be there. It doesn't in any way reduce the risk by having more money, but at least it provides them with reassurance that a medical bill will be covered in the worst case scenario. And what that does is it addresses the need that communities are calling for their children, some of their children that have special needs, to be in school, the teachers that are teaching those students to have the vaccination, and still to have a significant, the greater percentage of the available vaccines for our elderly population. Like, that is a plan. That is a solution. You resolve the general concerns from both sides. You make a dramatic or radical mandate that you have distance learning across the state, right, for 6 weeks. Why isn't that an actual proposal? Now, I'm not saying that's ideal. We can argue whether it's on the unions, and I know there's a political aspects of all this, but Bill, have you heard anything like that from anyone? Has anyone come forth and said this would be the plan to do that's alternative to what the governor was doing?
No, absolutely not. We haven't heard anything like that on a broadcast basis or a mainstream basis since the beginning of the pandemic here in Rhode Island. So that's just not in the equation at this point.
Plan? You mean provide an additional plan as opposed to pontificate politically? And look at who the Pro-Joe interviewed. How many other opponents could they have found to Dan McKee politically in the gubernatorial race? I mean, it's none of the media, major media, is about plans. None of the major media is really about substance. None of our elected politicians have really stepped up, really at any level. McKee has to a certain degree on the small business community, but other than that, Gina Raimondo needs to resign. She should do it now. The state needs to move forward. People need to be made safe. This notion that we're going to operate in this sort of vague, amorphous leadership in the midst of, by their descriptions, an international pandemic, that's brutal. Absolutely brutal.
Yeah, you need to have that clarity of leadership right now. And I think that the governor is doing her own legacy a disservice. I mentioned earlier this week on Twitter or something that it'll be interesting to see how does a Brett Smiley, how does a Seth Magazine or anyone with ties to Point Judith Capital or GMR, Gina Marie Raimondo, and that organization, that alumni network, how does that brand perform in 2, 4, 10 years here in Rhode Island? What sort of legacy will it have? Right now, I think that there is going to be quite a sour legacy because of this leadership void and vacuum that's been created. And people aren't going to be able to say, you know what, she got us through COVID on a superficial level. And then she went and became the Commerce Secretary and made Rhode Island proud. I think that more and more people, every day that she remains the governor, are realizing that she has left an extreme void and extremely large gaps to fill that will taint her and her brand's legacy locally going forward.
And let's just be real about this, right? Like, I mean, lived experience in Central Falls, Pawtucket. My family and I, we live in Pawtucket now, and we've lived, I've lived in Providence in undergrad. I've had the privilege of living in the borderline of Warwick and EG, and enjoyed it all, right? All of our towns and cities. But there's something that's been so raw about being in the areas of Providence, Pawtucket, and Central Falls. Like, people that are close to us, their parents are dying. Their parents are young, right? What the fact is that when you look at the age groups between 50 and 65, not above 65, the Latinx community is having a lot of people die. And, what is the generational trauma that will concede from what's going on now? Like, the legacy, there's 2 legacies to what's to this administration, right? And they're all in the eyes of the beholders, right? There's the privileged, politically connected, that will see that, there was a pipeline to DC that was paved this year in 2021. And those politicians that are trying to position themselves to be next governor really just want to follow that path. And they've been following our current governor for years. So it's pretty clear. Then there's the other legacy, right? the children that will grow up without parents or that will hear stories of their young grandparents dying, the children that will experience a level of poverty that I remember experiencing when I was a child, which never leaves you. That feeling of hunger, or that feeling of not knowing what's going to happen next. And yeah, you have the opportunity to lift yourself up from your bootstraps, but plenty of people don't know how, right? What is the trauma? And the governor is leaving with partially finished programs. I know that it was nice in the hearings to talk about retraining programs, but the Skills Rhode Island, Jobs Rhode Island, I mean, all these programs, you look at them and it's incomplete. There's an agenda on a page and there are no links to where you can go. That is a reality of the legacy that historically disenfranchised communities in Rhode Island are going to experience, not simply because this administration failed those communities, but because prior administrations also failed those communities. And it just so happened that when enough administrations fail a community and a pandemic hits, it's the small push that throws you off the cliff. And so we need something new in Rhode Island. I'm sorry to go on this little bit of a rant, but we need something different. We need to start thinking differently. We need to start acting differently. We need to be very methodical about the investments we make. And I'm not trying to be sophisticated when I use that word. I think we have a governor that has been sophisticated with words. I'm saying, like, in a practical sense, we need to make sure that we are protecting, preserving, and investing in the state of Rhode Island and its people. Because otherwise, the 6 years it will take to come back, and it should take, can easily turn into 12 and 20. And we have seen generational trauma in places like New York City, in places like LA, where the homelessness is out of control. We've seen what happens when you don't act fast enough. So now's the time to act. So I'm gonna throw it back at both of you. I know we have about 5 more minutes here, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, right? Like, we need leadership now, and the two legacies, just like the two cities, are one of them has no impact on Rhode Island, just on those that want a stepping stone. The other one has an impact on all of us. So my hope is that we can start, doing something about it quickly. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Pat and Bill? I kind of entered into a moment of reflection here, but it's really frustrating.
I'll just say this. Gina Raimondo's, if you were to judge her on the two seminal events of her, if you will, era of leadership here in Rhode Island, they would be the pensions and COVID. Now, life has a way of being unfair to political leaders. They come in with plans and ideas, and they got everything under control, and then life happens. She was a failure on pensions because, quite frankly, we're starting to lurch back into pension collapse. She didn't go far enough, ironically. The unions will hate me for saying that. And she's been an absolute failure as far as the disease goes, because, again, we're the worst at both. If you could say something, if you will, I don't know what it would say if we sacrifice lives to keep a business climate going, but we've sacrificed both. And inefficiency and failure has been the hallmark of virtually everything that she started from day one. From the silliness of cooler and warmer, or whatever the hell that was, on up to the life-defining 8 months that we've had. The book, what is the book? The series of unfortunate events says, that's all there is. There isn't anymore.
Yeah, and I'll quickly, leave with this note that, look, Gina Raimondo, the person, and Gina Raimondo, the political leader, I don't know where they intersect. I don't know how wide the center of the Venn diagram is. I'm not sure. You know what I mean? I've only met Gina Raimondo out of the political context maybe one time, whereas just about every other member of our leadership delegation I have seen in multiple venues, so to speak, and can kind of get a read for the human being involved. But, I sense that when she looks back on her tenure as governor, she'll acknowledge those mistakes in her heart. But she's one of those people that she'll never be able to do it publicly, and will not be a part of any rebuild from anything that has fallen out under her administration. She doesn't have the nature to not apologize, but to walk back mistakes. And we've seen that in the COVID pandemic where things are just flushed down the memory hole and we move on to the next week as if things didn't happen. And there's a lot of trial and error, and I get it. But to me, that's something about her legacy that I'll always remember is her willingness to forget rather than explain where her thought process is, where she's going, enact that plan and acknowledge when the plan needs to be altered because it does. And she, as a human being, is no different than any of us, and I think that ended up being something that she lost sight of at some point. And I also say on August 18th, 2018, I shook Governor Raimondo's hand at a barbecue for Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was hosting. He'd booked my band to play, and she had agreed at that point in time. She shook my hand. She agreed that she would definitely come on my podcast for a one-on-one interview. Here we are in 2021, and that's never happened. And you know what? It kind of bums me out because that's an opportunity that I think should have happened based on just human nature. If I shake someone's hand and say I'm going to do something, it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, your word should matter, right? I mean, as a leader,
Exactly.
should have, and so look, it's been an interesting show, especially for me because I see all these moves being made, and again, my concern is that this is the precedent that's been set, right? We had an administration that in 2018, when they didn't want to debate or talk, they wouldn't. An administration that would essentially only work with people in the media that were, good to them. And oftentimes we see that, right, in how the WPRs of the world interacted with the administration. And yet, those same outlets were very surprised when the governor just chose to not speak with anyone, when people were dying and the governor just said, I won't answer questions. That's not a Biden mandate. Even if they said don't speak to the media, you're the governor, right? I mean, that was your choice to not speak with media outlets. And so all of that precedent that was set by an administration that was too solid, too on point to have to answer any of our questions. Well, now my concern is we're going to start seeing that in this transitional administration and possibly in 2022, right? For the politically established. We shouldn't accept that. I think it's important to leave this particular show with an acknowledgement that now is the time during this transition to acknowledge what didn't work, to call it out, and to ensure that this administration, which seems to be positioning the same old players, to really get its act together. And if it wants to create change, to start mobilizing leaders and independent media, people to bring truth to these conversations and to ensure that the decisions are informed by communities and not people who are sitting on any type of pedestal looking down and strategically looking at how they can monetize or use it to their advantage. So I know that that's bold. I know that people might be a little on fire when they hear that, but so be it. It's time to be bold, and it's time to again, to fight for justice, health justice, and all other types. So with that, we're at time. We're not going to be able to do our 60 seconds today because there's another show coming up. But I do want to thank Bill and Pat, this show, for being so done so quick. I think it's been very informative, and you've all brought a great amount of perspective and information. So thanks, guys. Hope you have a safe and good night. Pat, you have that little cough. I hope you feel better. Let me know that you are feeling better, because with a cough these days is really scary. And for everyone watching, be safe, stay healthy, wear a mask, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.